Good evening all, and welcome. Staying in remote places, as we know, can be a pretty creepy experience, especially when you're staying in a small wooden hut or cabin. I'm sure it provides much protection, right? So for now, get comfortable and let the darkness take control. About a year ago, I got an Alaskan Malamute puppy. I was so excited to have a dog. I wanted to go hiking with him, camping, travel. It was fall in Iowa, so it can get pretty cold for camping. So I decided to start researching cabin rentals. I had found an amazing cabin in Wisconsin on Airbnb. It was fully loaded, very secluded in the middle of the woods, which included a hot tub, internet, pool table, and a great kitchen. The cabin was so beautiful, and it was pretty cheap to rent. The first time I had visited this cabin, I had a great time. It was just me and my dog. I relaxed, we went hiking, I cooked a great dinner, and I slept pretty well. I only stayed one night, just to get a quick getaway from my day off work, and after getting home I told my friend Martha about this great cabin, and she was eager to want to make a trip up there with me. We decided to go up there the night before Halloween. We took off, just Martha, my dog, and myself, and that night we had a blast. We drank, cooked dinner, chilled in the hot tub, and then decided to watch scary movies since it was so close to Halloween. I was pretty drunk by then, and was standing in the kitchen when I could have sworn I saw Martha running down the basement stairs, which were right off from the kitchen where I was standing. Then I looked over into the living room and Martha was sitting on the couch, watching the movie. I was so freaked out, but again I was drunk, so I kind of blew it off. We both ended up passing out late, and nothing else exciting happened. What happened the next morning is what has made me a solid believer in the paranormal. I was always a sort of skeptic when it came to ghosts. I had some experiences that were weird, but I could somehow justify it as something else, so I always had doubt in the back of my mind. But that morning we were pretty hungover. We ate a little breakfast, then decided to go sit in the hot tub, so I decided to lock my dog in his crate and we went outside to get in the hot tub. It was so magical because it was literally Halloween and it was dumping down snow. We sat in the hot tub for perhaps 15 minutes and I could have sworn I heard a bang inside the cabin, and my dog was barking at something. We got out and ran inside to the kitchen since it was so cold, and then we literally froze in our footsteps. The entire kitchen was torn apart. All the cabinets were open. The refrigerator door at the top freezer doors were open. The bar chair was all flipped onto their backs. Drawers were open, pans were thrown off shelves. Martha's phone was charging on the counter and it was unplugged and on the floor. I have no other explanation than paranormal. My dog looked terrified, but there's no way he could have done that. He's still a puppy, so he wasn't even that big. And besides, he was still locked in his crate. Before we went outside, the kitchen was a little messy from our night before, but nothing like what we walked into. The kitchen was trashed. I know Martha didn't do it because we both went outside at the same time, and there was also no way someone broke into the cabin to do it. We were in the middle of nowhere, and it was snowing, so we would have heard footsteps. And the hot tub sat right next to the long driveway leading to the cabin, and we would have seen someone drive up there for sure. I just have no other explanation as to how that stuff happened. So now I'm a believer. And so is Martha. I'm sure my dog saw some crazy stuff. We left pretty soon after this happened, and believe it or not, I actually stayed at this cabin again multiple times and nothing happened since. Maybe Halloween stirred up the spirits, and they just wanted to be seen or heard in some way. Maybe I really did see a ghost the night before. But who knows what crazy things might have happened in the cabin. It is very old, and actually bookable this summer. It's literally booked out all the way until the end of September. It must be pretty popular. I noticed it's available on Halloween again. Maybe I should go back. I lived in an old mountain cabin from when I was 6 to shortly before my 15th birthday. That is to say, most of my childhood, I lived with my mum and stepdad, and at any given time, we had pets. For most of the time I lived there, we had a Rottweiler named Kayla. She's important to the events that happened here. So things started happening around when we moved in. The cabin is built in the side of an incline, so there's sort of a bridge from the back of the top floor of the house that you can use to get outside. This bridge is connected to what was my first bedroom there by a small balcony and a sliding glass door that didn't have a curtain. So at night, it was just this incredibly dark scene outside the door, which would scare any kid my age. Eventually, a few years later, my mum reorganized the house and put me in the downstairs bedroom. It was warmer, being closer to the fireplace, and that move was a birthday present from my parents. This was my room for most of the time I lived there, and the room I had when my family got our dog, Kayla. My parents would leave me alone at times to go shopping or run errands, leaving me alone until 8 or 9 p.m. on my own. I didn't mind this at first, but then I eventually started to experience things when I was alone that left me afraid to be there on my own. I would hear a male and female voice calling or whispering my name, knocking, rustling, footsteps and the like. Kayla would also suddenly start growling or barking at absolutely nothing. Note that we lived in a small mountain town, so there weren't many cars or pedestrians that went by, especially not after dark. I began to keep Kayla close, feeling that we were safer together. Eventually, my mum moved me back upstairs, this time to the front room, which had its own small balcony. Around this time, when I was 12 or 13, is when the activity became much more intense. I remember sitting in my room around sunset, reading a book of ghost stories no less, a book that I still own, and suddenly hearing a man call my name very loudly. I was surprised, of course, and went downstairs to ask my parents if they had called me. They said they hadn't, so I told my mum what had happened, which she didn't have an explanation for. During the summer, I would camp outside near our house on my own. I can recall an instance where I had brought my DS out to my campsite with me, and after playing for late into the night and leaving my lantern on, I fell asleep with my sleeping bag only pulled up to around my waist, right before I drifted off. I felt a warm wind blow through my tent and woke up in the morning completely tucked in, as if my mother had come to check on me, which my mum denied doing, and she probably went to sleep before me anyhow, and my lantern was off. At first I thought that I had left it on and the bulb burnt out, but I was able to turn it on just fine. Back in my new upstairs room, whenever I came down the stairs, I would have a clear view down the hall to the sliding glass door I mentioned previous. Usually nothing noticeable was out there, but I always got a bad feeling about the area. One night around dusk, my parents called me down for dinner, and as I'm heading down the stairs, I see a glimpse of a woman in a big black dress pressing her hand against the glass. The main thing that scared me about her? She didn't have a face. It was just a skull. That evening terrified me to the point that I started having Kayla sleep in my room with me. At night I would hear whispering and footsteps that sounded like someone pacing and muttering in the living room, right beneath my bedroom. My mum told me she heard it too, being in the downstairs bedroom next to a hallway leading right to that living room. One night shortly before I left the house, for other reasons, not the activity, I had left the curtain covering the glass door that led to my balcony open so that I could see the moon and stars. I woke to the sound of Kayla growling and looked outside to see a transparent form on the balcony, kind of reminiscent of that famous photograph of the brown lady, but instead it was hooded. It looked like the same entity that I had seen out the back door. That was my last major encounter before moving out, but the whispering and the footsteps from the downstairs persisted for the remainder of my time there. To this day, my mum and I agree that the house was haunted. My stepdad, however, is more of a skeptic and denies it. I also want to add that right after I moved in, that being opened the closet in my first upstairs bedroom, and finding what appeared to be the naked, shuddering form of a woman in the fetal position caused me as a 6-year-old to slam the closet shut and never open it again for as long as I lived there. I lived in Pennsylvania until I was 1 month shy of being 12. I know that exact date because you had to be 12 to hunt in Pennsylvania, and I was looking forward to it. We moved to Florida, and I get to hunt down here too, so that's okay. I had a few good friends that lived right down the street from me. We lived right out in the country. My address was literally 1692/2 Stanley Road, middle of nowhere. So we'd hang out at my buddy's place, or we'd go up this hill for about half a mile until we reached the burn pile and cabin at the top. It was a really basic cabin. Outhouse, no lights, nothing. We'd hang out there and use it as a fort for Nerf battles, manhunt, CTF, whatever. Well, one night my friend invited a few of his friends/cousins up to the cabin so we could roast marshmallows and play manhunt. There was something like 13 of us to start, but the numbers slowly went down to 10 by nightfall, so we played manhunt 5v5 in the dark. Around 11 p.m, we were in the middle of a game, and 2 of my friends had hung back with me because we were the fast ones. We realized that there were only 3 of us left on our team, and that we hadn't captured anyone from theirs. We tried to make a jailbreak and lost my friend, Francis. It was just myself and Lewis. Lewis and I were 100 yards from the other team, and they had 3 out of our 5 players now in their jail. They began to press our sides more to mess with us, until one of them told us that we were cheating. Lewis and I looked at each other, unable to figure out why. Our side had about a quarter of it covered, heavily in trees. The other side was about the same, with both wooded areas near the back of the sides. At one point when we were chasing someone off our side, I saw Lewis and I run in the same direction and someone on the other side of Lewis. I quickly cut behind Lewis and intended to surprise the other person and nab them on our side, as I was probably the fastest person there and didn't want to be on the team to capture no one. Once I emerged from behind Lewis's trajectory, we were both running, and I saw absolutely no one. Nothing. No trees, no scarecrows, absolutely nothing that I could have mistaken for a person. I surmised that there had to have been someone from the other team, hiding behind our lines, waiting for us to cross over and then tag us there. Well, the game ended up dwindling down to just us 2 left, and the other side with 4. We capped one person, and then all parties were exhausted. I asked the other team, mostly Lewis's cousin, who was behind the line waiting to cap us, but no one claimed responsibility, and I figured it was someone trying to mess with us. Back at the cabin, we started cooking hot dogs and marshmallows over a fire. We were about 10 to 13-ish, with one person being maybe 15, that being the older cousin. So we're all drinking soda and not beer. Note, if this had been beer and I'd have been older, I'd have just chalked this part up to booze. All 10 of us are around the fire when we saw someone coming up the hill. It's hard to see outside in the dark when you've been staring at a fire for a while, but at least 4 of us had seen this person, so we figured it was one of the people who left coming back or someone new. After about a half hour, no one came up. We went and looked but found no one. Being the intelligent young kids we were, we decided to investigate further. It's summer, after midnight, and we're all out playing with fire and flashlights looking for a mystery person. Yeah, we're not honor students. We went to the path that led down the hill and could clearly see my friend's house in the distance. They left the outside light on for the dogs, you see, but there was no one in between. Someone was trying to mess with the group, so they ran into the woods and came out directly on top of us, scaring the crap out of everyone. After we all changed our pants and regrouped, we headed back to the cabin only to see someone on the very far side of the clearing. There were 3 of us with flashlights, and all of us attempted to illuminate the person, but we were too far away to get a good look. And as soon as we lit them up, she or he vanished into the woods. Okay then, now a few of us are freaking out. 6 people decide to go down to my friend's house to spend the rest of the night, where the axe murderer from hell won't be able to get them. Since they have 6, and the 4 of us who decided to rough it are only 4, the larger group got the flashlights. I was the only one left with 1. We decided to figure out who this was. Lewis had an uncle who was only 10 years older than him, and we figured that it was just him messing with us. We knew his place was less than a mile from where we were, as there was a big extended family that owned much of this land. Lewis, Francis, and one of Lewis's cousins called Charlie and myself began to walk across the clearing. Once we were about 40 feet from the edge of the woods, we could hear someone moving around in the bush, not stomping or anything, but very carefully moving through the fallen sticks and underbrush, trying to make as little noise as possible. We figured it was Lewis's uncle, Uncle Josh. So we split up again and 2 people waited in the clearing, Francis and Lewis's cousin, and myself and Lewis went into the woods to try and flush out Uncle Josh. We figured Francis and Charlie could see okay into the clearing, and to be honest, they actually could. Lewis and I eventually were about 50 feet into the woods, further than we thought we needed to go, when we heard this low rumble noise. This is one of those times where I regretted acting so macho. Lewis and I looked at each other to make sure that it was neither of us rumbling, and basically just stopped dead in our tracks. I shined the flashlight up in the direction of the noise, directly away from the clearing and the fire, and couldn't see anything. There was nothing there. It was to this day one of the most eerie noises I've ever heard, like a Halloween decoration would have made, but real. We stayed 50 feet into the woods, never venturing much further, and searched the general area, but never found anything. After a half hour, and it's now past 2 a.m., we heard a noise just at the edge of the clearing, and both of us turned around. I had expected it to be Francis and Charlie coming to figure out what the hell was taking us so long, but instead, I see one person basically hiding halfway behind a tree looking at us. I've never not wanted to shine my flashlight on something before that moment. If it was dark, I wanted to see what it was. But in the distance, well past the shadowy character, I could see Francis and Charlie milling around the fire. I had this awful feeling that there was no way Uncle Josh was being this creepy. I didn't want to see who it was, and I really wanted to get away from them. I mean, the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. Lewis must have seen it too, because he slowly started backing further into the woods. We moved in a wide circle as we went around this shadowy person and managed to make it back to the clearing. When we got back to the cabin and grabbed Francis and Charlie, we began to make our way back to Lewis's place. When we were about 100 yards from the cabin, we heard its door slam, and we bolted. When we made it back to Lewis's house near the bottom of the hill, we debated what to do. Should we call 911? Was it a trespasser, or was it simply a family member messing with Lewis? We went to notify Lewis's parents, who we figured would be overjoyed at the promise of being woken at 3 a.m. by a bunch of sweaty, terrified 11-year-olds. They weren't home. Apparently, Lewis's grandfather had a heart attack around 10 p.m., and none of us had cell phones as this was 1998, and no one had been notified except for Lewis's 19-year-old step-cousin. I never really figured out that relationship, to be honest, who had drank himself near blackout drunk as soon as the adults left him in charge of the younger kids. He got a serious talking to the next day by basically every adult in attendance. That meant that Uncle Josh and basically every other member of Lewis's family who could have been messing with us were all at the local hospital with the patriarch of the family who'd had a mild coronary. At 4 a.m. we knew sleep wasn't an option and began to watch and wait for the shadow guy to show up at the bottom of the hill. Less than 10 minutes later I hear a sound coming from upstairs. Only problem is that there is no upstairs in Lewis's house. There's something or someone on the roof. Lewis grabs a pellet gun, because that's going to be super effective, and we go outside because, we're smart and stuff. We shine every flashlight straight up at the roof and see a completely black silhouette jump off the far side of the house in a mad sprint. The way Lewis's roof was shaped, the part he jumped off was over 25 feet high, and there was a huge vaulted ceiling in the back room of the house, and the roof was even taller to accommodate for the attic. We watched it run from the hill and towards the creek, 10 feet wide and maybe 2 feet deep, and we followed it until we realized how much faster it was than us. Once it reached the edge of the creek, it stopped and looked back at us. This rumbling thing came back, and it jumped the creek, and we lost it. The next day we told Lewis's parents and they informed us that the cabin was being torn down. A cow had been killed and dismembered in the cabin earlier that morning, presumably after we left. It could have been a panther, as cows weren't uncommon in that part of the property but tended to avoid people. It could have been a bear, but hell, we never went back up that hill at night. We never saw that thing again. It might not seem like much, but to 11-year-old me, I had a new face for fear. A group of friends were staying at this remote cabin that one of my friend's cousins owned. There were no roads leading to the cabin, and it was a good 3 to 4 day hike from where you parked the cars. I couldn't go at the same time as everyone else due to work obligations, so decided to head up the same day but later. It would mean I would have to camp for a night by myself though. The latter part of this trail is too dangerous to be taken at night, especially by someone who doesn't know it. I didn't care. I was kind of looking forward to it as I've never camped alone before. I was in the middle of the woods when the sun went down. I got my camp set up in this small clearing probably 40 feet across, get my campfire going and pitch my small one-person tent. Do all that camping stuff like cooking hot dogs on a stick over the fire and s'mores. I'd probably stay up for a good 2 or 3 hours after dark. It was mid-autumn, so the days were somewhat short. The entire time I thought I heard something moving in the woods, at the edge of the clearing. I didn't think anything of it at first because the woods are full of animals, but as the night went on I realized that whatever it was just circling the clearing over and over. Once I started paying attention, it made 4 or 5 laps around before I decided to get up and investigate. The noise stopped as soon as I stooped up and thought I heard some sound going away through the woods. I just shrugged it off, thinking that perhaps it was a fox that was curious and got scared when I stood up. I decided it was time to sleep, douse the fire, and climb into my tent. I began to doze off and stay in that half sleep awake state for a while. I normally hear weird stuff when I'm in this state, so don't think too much of it when I hear a voice. Something wakes me all the way up though, and I realize it's real and just outside my tent. It's just above a whisper, and I'm not sure if it was in another language or they were speaking English in such a way that I didn't understand. I lay there for some time. I didn't know how long. I was listening and waiting for something to happen. There is just enough moonlight to light up the walls of the tent so I can see a hand press into the wall of my tent down near my foot. This freaks me out and I sit up quickly. Whoever was outside tore us out of there, like running full sprint through the woods. I get out the tent and shine my flashlight around and see nothing. I was expecting there to be a bloody handprint on the tent, but nope. I didn't sleep that night, packed up camp at first light in the morning, and booked it to the cabin. I used to be a scout leader, and each year we go during the New Year period to a camping site. Being in Canada, New Year weather is pretty damn cold, think minus 20 to 30 Celsius, so the camping is done in lodges. The lodge we slept in had no toilets, so each night before we went to bed, I'd round up my scouts and walk them to the bathroom, which happened to be in another lodge, at about a minute walk away. That year, I happened to have two really immature kids that were taking too much time to get ready, so I sent my scouts to the washroom and told them that I'd catch up to them once the two guys would stop mucking around. A few minutes later, we were on our way. By then, most of the children had already brushed their teeth and went to the toilet. When I finally enter the lodge, I can see that most of them had congregated around the vending machine in the hallway across the toilet. So I enter the toilet with the two kids that were with me, and I check to see if there was anyone in the stalls. "Is anyone in the toilets?" "Yeah." I recognize the voice of Jay, one of my scouts, and then proceed to brush my teeth. A few minutes later I ask again, "Everything good?" "Yeah." This time I recognize the voice of another kid, Walter. At the moment, I make nothing of it and assume I just misheard the voice the first time round. A few minutes had passed and even the two difficult kids I was with had finished prepping themselves. So I ask if everything's good again but get nothing back. So I asked the two kids to start opening the stores to see if something had happened to Walter. There were about 8 of them, all empty. The two kids start freaking out because they also heard the voices, and since they had been using the sink, which was right by the door, there was no way for someone to pass them without being noticed. So I send them to the shower stalls and once again there's no one. The two kids were now becoming really agitated, so I decided it was time to regroup in the hallway and head back. Back in the hallway I see both of the kids who we thought we heard, who denied having entered the washroom after I came in. To this day, my scout squadron refers to this incident as the Poop Monster Incident. My family, along with 4 others, own a hunting cabin deep in the woods of Pennsylvania. When hunting season is out, the cabin becomes a vacation spot for these families. We would often all end up there during the 4th of July weekend. One year, my parents decided to take me, my uncle, 3 years older than me, and my 2 childhood friends up to the cabin for Easter. My parents decided to go out to the bar for a bit and leave us kids at the cabin alone. The youngest of us was 7 at the time and the oldest 14. It's cold, and there are 8 inches of snow on the ground. The sun has started to set, and the 4 of us had gathered around the table in front of the wood stove and are playing Uno. We have several battery-operated lamps set about in the cabin, as well as 2 outside to light the walkway for my parents when they come back. Just as we are finishing a game and getting ready to take the 30-yard walk to the outhouse, we start to hear the snow below the window crunch. Being kids, we all felt a bit uncomfortable, but reminded ourselves that we were in nature, and it was probably just a deer. And finally, after some coaxing, me and the other 2 girls convinced my uncle to peek out the window. He said he saw nothing. As soon as he sat back down, we started to hear a low grunt and heavy creaking sound on the front porch. Now, before my parents left, they gave my uncle the keys to the gun cabinets and a rundown on which gun to use if there were trouble. So like any good protector, he arms himself, and we hear heavy breaths and heavy paws on the porch side on the other side of the door. Those heavy paws then start to crash repeatedly into the front doors. All 4 of us ran upstairs and locked the wooden door like it would provide any kind of protection from the 400-pound black bear that was trying to break in. About 10 minutes go by and we finally hear the front door fall, and the bear was in the cabin with us. He rummaged through the downstairs for half an hour. As a small and frightened child, it felt like forever, until he finally left. It never attempted to come upstairs for us. My parents were happy, and we were all right, and they never left us alone that long again. Last year I vacationed in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Georgia. It was a wonderful trip, save for a few things. You'd need to understand the area where I stayed. It was a large cabin close to McKaysville, but not really in any town. There were cabins nearby, however, the closest which was about 150 yards, with one about twice as far on the other side. This distance is filled with dense trees, steep inclines, rivers and streams. This is the front door and deck area of the cabin. Moving to the right of the previous perspective, this is the side of the cabin. Something to note on this one is that the two windows there were the windows of my bedroom, and it was possible to just stand outside there. Honestly, nothing happened in relation to those windows, but with everything else that happened, I was on edge because of the placement of them. And finally, we have the back deck. As you saw, where the house sat was at an incline. Walking in the front door and down through the basement would bring you to the backyard. Upon walking through the front door, you would see the living room to your left, and to your right was my room and the basement, the doors sitting not 8 inches apart. The living room is connected to the kitchen and dining area, with the upstairs having my parents' room, a bathroom and a locked door. As I mentioned, some of the decorations were a little bit odd. With this being the first painting in the living room, this is a picture that sits upstairs, and here's a broken picture in the basement, and 2 locked doors, which is not uncommon in an Airbnb, but they didn't have a lock like a bathroom or bedroom door. They had a different kind. You could completely turn the knob and the door wouldn't open. It wouldn't even rattle between the sides of the lock when pushing or pulling. The door had no give. It had to have been bolted from the inside, which makes me wonder how it's opened. Being the blubbering fool that I am, I didn't take pictures of them, just figured it was storage. But now to the meat of the story. We arrived on the 19th and my birthday was the 23rd. The night of the 22nd at 11:35 p.m. is the time in question. I was staying up with some close friends until midnight, so we could be there as I turned 16. They had all already turned 16 earlier that month or prior, because a lot of us were born in July. We were in a Discord call, watching Nikocado Avocado eat an exorbitant amount of food, me laughing at his gluttony-fueled breakdown because he's a clown. My dog was asleep on my bed, but began scratching at the door because she had to use the restroom. Something to understand about her is that she's big, but has the energy of a small dog at times. She is a 90-pound pit bull, and was on edge entering the cabin, which is very uncommon for her. In any situation, I would describe her as just happy to be there. But this time was different. I had to take her around the perimeter of the cabin multiple times before she would come inside, and even then, she'd just walk into her cage that we had brought with us for her while we were in town. Rarely would she go in there unless told to, but she almost ran to it. I told my friends I would be right back because Blue had to use the restroom. To bring her outside to go to the bathroom, I had to go down through the basement and out the backyard, where a very long tether was spiked to the ground. I was standing just inside the door and flipped the lights on. I reached to grab Blue's collar, but she wasn't there where she just was. I looked over and she was staring out the window into the backyard. She's honestly the goofiest dog, so I figured she must have seen a bug, and I opened the door, grabbed her collar and tried to pull her outside, but she wouldn't go. She's big enough that I can't make her move if she doesn't want to, and it took some convincing. But even when she was outside, she didn't take her eyes off the other side of the backyard, which I couldn't see. It was too dark, even with the porch light, which only illuminated about 10 feet in front of me at best, the end of the backyard being 30 feet in front of me. I was starting to grow nervous, because she usually doesn't act like this, so I attached her to my tether and kept her close. After about 10 seconds, she started to pee, but kept her eyes locked on where they had been. Then I heard the most unnatural noise coming from the other side of the yard. I need you to understand that at its core it sounded like a person. If it sounded like an animal, I wouldn't have been so afraid. But it sounded like a person, badly mimicking the noise a frog makes, and it was loud. It had to have been, because southern bugs never stop wailing. The bugs and other wildlife were very loud. For me to have heard this noise as loud as I did, that noise must have been yelled. Blue, who has never done this and has no aggressive bone in her body, started growling very aggressively. She still wanted to go inside, and after I unhooked her, she started backing up, but she was showing her teeth and foaming at the mouth and growling. As we backed up, I heard it again, from more to the left on the trail with wooden logs on either side. I pulled her inside and she took no time darting back up the basement stairs and into my room. I slammed the door and made sure to lock it, and went back up the stairs and specifically remember locking the door at the top as well. It can only be unlocked from the main part of the house where I was, and I swear this to all that is holy as I locked the door quickly. We all agreed that it was really weird and I should look over there when I wake up in the morning. I didn't sleep until 2 or 3 a.m. At 7 my alarm went off and I woke up and the basement door was wide open. My sisters were asleep down there because it had a bedroom. They couldn't have opened it. It can only be unlocked from the other part of the house. My mother and stepfather weren't even awake yet. The door was opened abnormally wide, swung all the way around so it was hitting the wall behind it. And after checking, the door from the basement to outside was unlocked as well, but not opened. I haven't the slightest idea how this could have happened. These doors can only be unlocked from the opposite side. The following day was my birthday, and it went all right. The night of the 23rd we were packing up because we were leaving to go early on the morning of the 24th. It was between 9 to 10 p.m, and I had to retrieve the spike and tether from the backyard in order to finish packing. I psyched myself up, grabbed a light and power walked over. I pulled it out the ground and quickly walked back up to the house. Around the time I reached the porch, I heard the noise again. This time immediately to my right and extremely loud. Again, the bugs are constantly producing the most deafening buzzing noises to the point where having a conversation a little bit apart is rather difficult. It was the same very human-like noise. Still, the best description I could come up with was a human very badly mimicking the sound of a frog or toad. This is where I was standing. This is similar to the picture from the backyard facing the house, but over 20 feet. You can see where I was near the door and where it had to have been. For a moment I thought about going over there to see what it was and finally answering the question that I had been asking myself. But I value my life too much, so I ran inside, slammed the door and drew the blinds. Truthfully, I didn't sleep at all that night. I stayed awake listening for the noise again and pretended to wake up the next morning. I've been searching online for whatever may have been responsible but can't find any logical answers. If anyone has any idea on what could have made that noise, I would love it if you could get in touch. A few years ago, me and my friends went on a trip to this secluded cabin in the mountains. We were there for the entire weekend and had a blast. However, around midnight on a Friday, we heard a blood-curdling scream and a loud crashing noise coming from outside. We thought nothing of it at first, but the screams continued, so we decided to investigate. What we found was something that no rational mind could ever have imagined in a billion years. We found ourselves staring at a bizarre creature which we can only describe as a cross between a goblin, a demon, and something completely unnatural. It had no eyes, only hollow black sockets, which gave it a completely hollow stare. This thing was covered in a thin sheen of dripping blood, which glistened in the moonlight. It was busy, hacking apart what appeared to be the lower half of a girl. It had already made a pretty good job of it, and when it noticed us, it let out a bestial roar. My best friend screamed and fainted. The other friend ran and hid, and I froze in fear. We never told anyone about this, not our parents, our friends, no one. Even now, after years, I get nervous whenever I have an encounter in the woods after midnight. We got out of there as soon as we could. No way we were going to stick around for nature's oddest work of art. The murderer was long gone, thank God. Hey guys, it's Mort here. Thank you all so much for listening. I do hope that you enjoyed tonight's cabin stories. I really like the cabin stories. We don't do them anywhere near as often. But the truth is, I don't find them anywhere near as much as I should, because not many people have scary stories in cabins, I guess. Still, these were fun. I liked doing them. Let me know what you thought down below, and follow me on Twitter because I'm not going to stop asking until you do. You know who you are. I'm surprised how many people say they don't have Twitter, in all honesty. I hope everyone is doing well, and I'd like to extend another huge thank you to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen and who get little perks for signing up and stuff. So, you know, if you're a member and or patron, remember to use up your perks and message me to do so. But for now, guys, I think I'm going to call it a night. So stay awesome, sweet nightmares, and I'll see you in the next one.